Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast. Wait, before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning into this episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast, and just ask you to please hit the like button below, or click the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or follow this podcast if you are listening. That really helps the show out. But also, if you want to help us further, then join our Patreon. We have an awesome community that is growing there. Or if you want to make a one-time donation, we are a nonprofit foundation. So head to our website. Both the Patreon and the website will be linked down below. But without further ado, back to the episode. I'm your host, Bradon Coy, and I am super excited. I'm coming at you with a new guest on the show. This week, we're talking with Dr. Wayne Ohnesorg, and I'm very excited to chat with him. We met at the ESA conference a couple months ago. Wayne is a extension educator, and he works at the University of Nebraska Lincoln in the entomology department, and I'm very excited to chat with him. I've had a couple other people from Nebraska on the show in the past, but yeah, Wayne, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming, and go ahead and say hello to the people. Introduce yourself a little bit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Wayne Ohnesorg. As you've already heard from Bradon, I'm from Nebraska, and I do a lot of extension work up here in terms of taking that research-based information out to the people. And thank you for having me on today, Bradon, and hello to everyone that's joining.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for that introduction. Well, Wayne, let's just jump right into it. Let's start with a little bit. What is your job like right now as an entomologist? And then later on, we'll go back to the beginning. But tell us a little bit about what you do right now with your role at UNL and what it means to be an entomologist to you.
All right. So my role, I'm going to start with my role at UNL because it kind of gives the framework for everything. Within UNL, we have Nebraska Extension. That's our branding name for our extension service. Sometimes you'll see cooperative extension. Other places, sometimes you'll just see extension service across the country. It really varies. So our flavor here in Nebraska is just Nebraska Extension. Straightforward, sweet, and short and simple. The general idea behind the nationwide extension is taking research-based information out to the people so that they can use that to better their lives, their businesses, their careers, whatever area that it happens to be in. For me specifically, I work within the water and cropping systems program area. In Nebraska Extension, we have 8 program areas. I'm not going to try and list them all because I will inevitably forget one of the 8. And I predominantly work in the water and cropping systems area. I do work a little bit and slide over into our horticulture and environmental systems piece as well, mainly because as an entomologist in a county extension office, there are 86 county extension offices across the state of Nebraska. There are 93 counties in the state. Some of those counties have gone together for a single extension office. So if you're doing the math, there's a reason why it doesn't add up. And I'm in one of those 86 extension offices. And I'm in the northeast part of the state. For those that, I'm not going to get into too much detail, Nebraska geography for a lot of people. But I'm just in the northeast corner. That's probably the best way to put it. I'm an hour from Iowa. I'm an hour from South Dakota. So it kind of gives you an idea where I'm at. And a lot of what walks in the door is homeowners that have various things that they need identified help with. They found it on their garden plants in their home. It really varies to what kind, but that's the bulk, and that's why I slide into that horticulture and environmental systems area a little bit. It's mainly because of what walks in the door. But I do work quite a bit with farmers and producers.
Yeah, so we've talked about extension quite a bit on the show in the past, but what is Nebraska's extension service like? Is its main purpose basically just to bridge the gap between science and the general public, or do you work mostly with farmers? What would you say is the majority of the audience that you work with?
For me, a lot of it is farmer, and then I do a lot of homeowner pieces. And so a lot of it could be summed up underneath the single umbrella of pest management. Might be the best way to put that in an umbrella of what I do. So how do we manage the things we don't want in the spaces we're trying to keep them out of? Or in some instances, and these are the fun ones, how do we get some of these things into the spaces where we want them. So things like pollinators would be a great example of that. I do get some questions on that end.
So how would you, someone calls you, they have an issue with their yard or something, right? And how would you determine whether it is the case of, like you were talking about with, something is there that we don't want to be there versus something's missing, like something like what you mentioned with pollinators, like there aren't enough pollinators in the area. What would be the differences in a solution to those two different issues?
I tackle both of them kind of in the beginning in the same way. I usually start by saying, okay, I need some information from you. I don't know everything that you know about what's going on. So I'm going to start asking you questions about the situation to help me understand exactly, as much as I can, what they're dealing with. Sometimes that's location within the yard. If they're on a slope, what direction does that slope face? Because we get differences between north slopes, west slopes, east slopes, south. All those different aspects of the immediate environment around there. One of the big things I ask a lot is if they're having trouble with a tree, have they done any dirt work in the area recently? And this can be as simple as putting in new sidewalk, putting in new sprinklers in the yard to water the yard.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is I went to the YMCA and they were having some tree issues, and just so happened they were redoing the parking lot, and this poor tree was in the middle of the parking lot, and you could see where they had ripped around this little island. All those roots had been pulled off, and they were on the side of the tree that was where the roots were going out into that reworked parking lot. And so some of that is just it's hard to explain without showing lots and lots and lots of examples of the kinds of things that I've learned in the 16 and a half years that I've been doing this. Just the sleuthing, think of this as like a good Hardy Boys novel. What's going on? What are our clues? What can we find out for this particular mystery? Or if you're a Scooby-Doo fan, what are your clues to find who's behind what? That's really where it all comes down to, finding that information. And then once you have it, making, just like a doctor would, a diagnosis on an illness, okay, what are our clues? What do we have for symptoms, signs? And then we put all that together and we go from there. And so not every answer is always the same. I get a lot of, well, that particular insect is not a problem. In fact, that one, the larvae feed on decaying plant material in the soil. They're a recycler. You want those around, I know we point at pollinators a lot, but there are a lot of other ones out there, or they're in such small number, they'll never do enough damage to anything to really warrant going after them. So that happens quite a bit, especially with the identifications of what is this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like you're a detective of sorts.
Really, it comes down to a lot. It's a good thing I like puzzles.
Yeah, yeah. Can you tell us what I'm not really familiar with the pests in Nebraska. What would you consider some of the more common cases that you find maybe in an urban environment and then also in a agricultural environment?
Okay. Well, we'll start with the urban environment. They all seem to go in a cycle with our seasons. Since Nebraska has a good solid 4 seasons, all 4 of which you can experience within a week sometimes.
Yeah.
But what we have here right now, the dermestid beetles are starting to get going. So those are things like your carpet beetles, whether they be larder beetles or variegated carpet beetles. Those tend to be the 2 big ones that I see quite a bit. Our clover mites are starting to get going, and oftentimes these are more nuisance. People see them and they're offended by them in their homes. The unfortunate thing is the clover mites just want out. They don't want to be inside. They want to be outside in the grass.
Mm-hmm.
Don't smash those. Don't ever smash those. They stain. And so that's one of those pieces that I get a lot of. As we move into our middle of summer, we get a lot of strawberry root weevils invading homes. Again, those are looking for just a cool place to escape the heat. So they like that air conditioning just as much as the people that are living in the home. They're flightless though. So they don't fly around, but they do crawl all over the place, and that can bother people. So that's some of the big ones. Cicada killer wasps are always a popular one in June when they start coming out. Thankfully, the media attention on the giant hornet in Washington and British Columbia has kind of died down. And when that was going hot and heavy, I had lots of people thinking they had those giant hornets. And no. No, most likely not. Fortunately, you can ask them, what color was the head? Was it yellow? Because these cicada killers do not have a yellow head, and those giant hornets do, and it's pretty easy to get them past that. Like, nope, these are the same things we see every year. It's okay.
Yep.
We don't need to go into full alarm mode and call in USDA and all those other fun regulatory agencies that we have to deal with. And then fall, depending on the year, and I'm going to make a linkage here to one of our agricultural pests that we'll see, the multicolored Asian lady beetle. While it's a lady beetle, does a lot of good things that lady beetles do. That particular one comes inside in the fall, and it has a habit of biting people. Not like break the skin and make them bleed bite, but they do bite, and you notice it. It's enough for that. And then when you smash them, they have those chemicals in their blood that have a very displeasing odor to them.
Yeah.
Or if they're handling them, those particular lady beetles also do that what we call reflex bleeding, where they exude a little bit of that foul-smelling blood outside of their body. And so those are not popular things with people. And in 2024, we had our largest outbreak of soybean aphid since 10 years before. 2024 was the first major widespread outbreak since 2014. And so both of those insects are from the same place in Asia, where soybeans are grown. And when we have high populations of soybean aphid, multicolored Asian lady beetle goes berserk in terms of reproduction. And they lots of food, they reproduce, and then there's a lot of lady beetles that fall that then invade homes. And so that's an interesting case study in of itself. I don't know if you've ever talked with anyone about soybean aphid, but this might be leading into some of the stuff you want to talk about later. But I did my master's work on soybean aphid management, and that particular critter coming in, it's referred to as an invasional meltdown sometimes. And so basically what we've done is the soybean is native to Asia, where these, the beetle and the aphid occur. Well, we brought the soybean here for agricultural production. Then that aphid needs a second host. So there's the secondary host, which is the summer host, that's soybean. And then what we refer to as the primary host, where they overwinter. And those are a couple of buckthorn species we have a couple native ones, but there's also a couple of introduced ones. Common buckthorn is one of the ones that's introduced, and it needs that overwintering host. Well, those were inadvertently introduced and escaped out into the wilds of Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. And so that aphid now has everything it needs to complete its life cycle here, because they were brought over intentionally or unintentionally by people. And so there's your invasional meltdown. We created the problem unbeknownst to ourselves. We don't know how the aphid exactly got here, but it did get here.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, yeah, so how about agricultural calls that you get?
Well, I mentioned the soybean aphid one. That was a big one this last year. I get a lot of questions in regards to a pest called western bean cutworm. It's a pest of corn and dry beans. The western part of the state, where I don't work very much in, grows a lot of dry beans. So those are like your pinto beans, lima beans, navy beans, great white northerns. There's a whole list of them. But that's a dry bean. And then, of course, your corn acres, doesn't matter whether it's field corn, sweet corn, your white corn, blue corn. It hits them all. Popcorn. Yeah, I know. It's interesting. It's not just corn. You have to delineate. And we grow all of those here in the state in various regions. I'm really close to some of the larger popcorn production areas. Nebraska is one of the leaders for popcorn production within the country.
Interesting.
Yeah. Fun stuff you learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, something that I've kind of learned recently is, and part of the reason that insect education is so important, is because a pest is really anything that someone perceives as a pest, if that makes sense. Like, if there is something in somebody's house, they might perceive it as a pest, just as in the sense that it's a nuisance, not that it actually does anything. And so I'm sure you get calls like that a lot, where people just don't want something living in their house, which I understand, obviously. So I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of the more, like, bizarre or, like, mysterious cases that you've come across? Maybe
Man,
like something that shouldn't be in Nebraska, or something that just took a long time to figure out? Like, what are some of the more bizarre or weird like challenges you've had to solve?
I could go so many different directions with this. One really, there's so many things, and I have to pick. Here's one of the fun ones. I had a case, and this has been a number of years ago now, where Nebraska is interesting because parts of the southeast portion of the state are in the natural range of the brown recluse spider.
Right.
And where I'm at, we are outside, or we are far enough north, we're not in the region where they can survive outdoors. They can, however, survive indoors. And over the years, I've had lots of people bringing in spiders that they thought were brown recluses. Invariably, they're either a wolf spider of some kind or a grass spider, anything that we necessarily need to be overly concerned about. Unless you're a cricket, then you're in trouble. However, I finally had someone from their apartment here in Norfolk bring one in, and it was alive. I had to freeze it so that I could get it to hold still to do because you can look at it, it's like, okay, this looks right, but if I want to like manipulate it and actually look at it, I got to freeze it and kill it. So I did that, and sure enough, it's got the 6 eyes in pairs of 2, and then it's got the characteristic fiddle on the cephalothorax, so that's the head and thorax fused together there, not the back end, not the abdomen. That's what most people are looking at, and that's what gets them into trouble with wolf spiders and grass spiders, is because there's always something there in terms of a stripe. But you could see the actual fiddle on the back, hence the nickname fiddlebacks for them. And it was a very interesting thing because we started a long chain of events. I didn't think much of it. They wanted just, something in writing saying what it was so they could bring it back to their landlord. And they also wanted the specimen back, which I was so bummed, because when you're not in an area that has them, getting a specimen like that's important, so you have it on file and you can show people. But this is what you're actually looking for. So it's really nice to get some of those. So I didn't get the specimen back. I didn't get to keep it. And then, so every year we give an update to our county commissioners, since in Nebraska, our operational budget is funded by the local county. Whereas I'm paid by a combination of state and federal funds is how that works. And so the county funds the operational budget, and we always tell them this is what we've been doing, and I always try to throw some interesting little tidbit in. And of course, that we report on the prior year, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I got a brown recluse spider. And the newspaper reporter who covered the meetings, which I've known for a long time, and he picked up on that, and it made the front page.
The front page
Of the local paper that we had found this spider. And so then I get, shortly after that rolls in the newspaper, I get a phone call from the individual who brought it in. And they're like, who are you telling what? And I'm like, okay, I didn't mention any names. I didn't say where we found it at in town, just that it was an apartment. And because they were a little worried that I was name dropping and all of that. I'm like, no. Confidentiality here. No names have been spoken. Just that it was brought in by somebody who was getting it identified and confirmed. And then the landlord got all upset because, somebody has brown recluse spiders in town. Well, the unfortunate thing is this was in our downtown sector, and they're the old style, late 1800s into early 1900s, where all the buildings touch each other. There is no gap between buildings. And so the whole block could have them very easily. Yeah. And I had another business owner contact one of the county commissioners and saying, hey, we've got those. And so then that county commissioner then called me and said, hey, this other business has got them. And so then I went down into the basement, and this is going to be fun. I don't know how it's going to show up on here. But I went down into the basement, and I was able to get a whole pile of dead brown recluse spiders. Now, for anybody that's paying really close attention, this is not a brown recluse spider. I picked it up because it's one of our long-bodied cellar spiders that love to eat other spiders. So if you're going to like a spider, that's a good one to like because it takes care of other spiders for you.
That's cool.
So I picked all these dead ones up. This particular business, the manager had been spraying on his own just some basic general use public available product to try and help keep them down. And it got back to the landlord of the apartment place that I had been in another building on the block. They owned other buildings on the block, and they thought I was in one of their buildings without being invited. And
Gosh.
I know, and so this, this is compounding, as you can tell, that they're just rolling in and like, okay. And then they even got to the point where that landlord was telling me, like, you're not allowed to talk to our residents about this anymore.
Oh my gosh.
And which is really interesting because I'm public access here as being an extension. I'm available to the residents of the state, and I've actually worked enough with. I'll help anybody as long as it's within my capability. I've taken phone calls from Indiana in the past because I don't know why I got the phone call from them, but they did. They found me somehow, some way.
Yeah.
And so, but I didn't tell them. I just said, okay, I understand. Thank you for letting me know. Be polite about it. Don't be confrontational, which really goes a long way in extension if you're not confrontational. Anybody that's aspiring to do that, being confrontational is not usually the best way to get people's attention. And so this...
Yeah, I mean... Yeah,
there you go, Bradon.
That's crazy because there's so many levels to that because it's almost like how when you're looking at a new car or you buy a new car and now everyone else has that car. You know what I mean? Like everyone else in town seems to be buying the same car as you. And it's only because you're looking out for it. And so now everyone's finding these spiders. You know what I mean?
Well, and since then, it's been 2-3 years since the whole newspaper piece hit and that all went down. So this is about a 3-year process in total now. I've had the same individual bring in a couple other things wanting confirmation. Only one of them has been another spider that was a brown recluse. But it's been an interesting run because it's, like you said, so many levels. There's a public relations piece here. There's a science communication piece, and there's working with media piece. That newspaper reporter felt so bad with what happened, because I ran into him and I was telling him some of what went down, and he was so apologetic that he even ran it like that. And I said, no, it's okay. I was in a public meeting, so this is an open meeting of our local government. I don't say anything I don't expect to maybe get repeated, and that's just good practice. Like if you don't want it repeated anywhere, you don't say it, especially in a public space.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and then there's the aspect of it being a spider, right? I think that has something to do with it as well, because there's that kind of taboo kind of overarching stigma around spiders, I think in general.
It's because it has twice as many legs as it should.
Yeah.
Four-legged things we're okay with. Two-legged we're great with. But 4's good. 6 is getting iffy. 8, that's just too many. And then the millipedes and centipedes are just out there and like, we're done.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, chipmunks are little and fuzzy and, cute. Spiders are little and fuzzy. I don't get what the whole thing is, but yeah. So
I'm just glad it happened after I was established and later in my career. Yeah. Otherwise, I couldn't imagine having to walk through this, my first year or two on the job and not having the experience under the belt to know, hey, it's okay, it'll be fine.
For those at home, the brown recluse is one of our more medically significant spiders in North America, next to, of course, the black widow, a couple others. It's one of the few in North America, and I'm not positive the extent to the medical side of it. Do you know, or
so when this all went,
or do you know?
When this all went down, I started doing some deep diving. It's near impossible to find truly linked cases of brown recluse bites to the classic necrotic flesh issues that are blamed on it. Generally speaking, and please note, I am not a medical professional here. But what I've been able to read and find is that they don't have much that actually links the brown recluse venom to that necrotic flesh issue. What it seems to be is secondary infection that is set in those bite areas, mainly because people won't leave them alone. you need to let it heal, or you scratch at it or something, or you just happen to be one of those people that are just sensitive enough it never really quite heals and stays open wound long enough that that secondary infection gets going. So that seems to be where it sits. We don't really have good hard evidence that they are as medically important as they are listed, but we don't really have great evidence to the flip side of that either, where they're not really of medical importance. So it kind of floats out there in the middle when you really do a deep dive into it.
And that might be due to the rarity of bites too. Like I think being bit by one is pretty rare. Like there's probably only a couple hundred a year, I would guess.
Yeah, they are very rare, and very rarely does anyone actually have the physical spider to match to the bite. And that's what makes it hard.
Right.
And that is one of the things, as an extension professional, I don't do bites. Everybody wants to know if you can look at their bite and say, is that a spider, is that a mosquito, or whatever. Like, no, I don't do that, because invariably you're going to be shown bites in
the medical side.
Yeah, well, and invariably you're going to be shown bites in areas that you don't want to be looking at. Yeah.
I mean, you didn't sign up. You're not a medical professional for a reason, right?
Exactly.
You didn't sign up for that. So yeah, I get that. Yeah, and then you're obviously treading on the medical advice side, which gets dicey. You're not qualified for that level of advice to someone's. If the bug
it's on the level of legal advice. It's on the level of legal advice. One of the things that they tell us is that stay away from legal matters and stay away from medical. You can advise them to go see their medical professional, go see their lawyer, but beyond that, you don't dabble in that at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, let's go to your schooling. Walk us through where you got your various degrees, what you got to study, and what those experiences were like. Yeah.
Well, we'll start. I actually started as a community college student. I did 1 full year of community college, and then I transferred that into the University of Wyoming. So I started there as a sophomore. University of Wyoming is interesting because there's only 1 4-year university in the state. That's it.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know.
Well, when you're dealing with a state that has a population of, I'm trying to remember if it's 460,000 or 600,000, it's not very much. I mean, we have a lot of cities across the country that have more population than the entire state of Wyoming does.
Yeah.
And so they only have the one institution. And so that's where I went. I went for Agroecology was the name of the degree at the time. Basic premise of that, it was an ecological approach to agronomy. So this is an agronomy degree where you're looking at more the ecological management. So you're literally learning to work within those natural systems and those natural processes to grow whatever it is. And the way that degree program was set up, it was an umbrella, and then you could concentrate and minor in multiple areas. So you had to have at least 2 concentrations, which if you took one more class than the concentration, you could get a minor. And so that worked out really easy. I mean, it was easy to get minors within that setup.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of classmates that would minor in horticulture, even though they're in this agroecology degree, they're minoring in horticulture. I took the route, I minored in soil science, agricultural entomology, and insect biology. And there were just enough entomology courses being taught at the time where I only had to double count 1 class. And that was the basic entomology class. There really was no substitute for that and getting around that. So I was able to triple minor and not take a lot of, actually no extra classwork in order to do that.
Wow.
So that was my undergrad experience. It was a lot of fun. I was in the agroecology club. Those degrees tend to have, those that go to a college are probably very aware. Your degree programs tend to have clubs associated with them.
Yep.
And so I was part of the agroecology club. I was president of the club my junior and senior year for that. And it was a lot of fun. We'd do various agricultural tours within the area, one a year. is what we would do. We'd rent some university vans, and there were a couple of professors that would go along with us, and we had some fun. One particular one, we went and saw some vegetable production on the Front Range of Colorado. And so this is all irrigated country. Very interesting in terms of what they were doing and how they were getting it done. And these people had their systems figured out to the point where they could grow it organically, but sell it on the conventional market and still make money.
Wow.
That was how well they had their system figured out.
So what would be the benefit of doing that? Like not having to pay the organic license, or what would that
they preferred to sell it organically on the organic market because they would get more for their product. But sometimes they were producing so much, there wasn't enough organic market for it at the time. So the one thing I'll say, this is a little telling on my age, this is 20 years ago, right when organic was just starting to get rolling, and the USDA had just stepped in with their certified organic program shortly before that to standardize the organic certifications across the country.
Yeah.
So the organic market wasn't as big yet as it is now. Now, whether or not they're still doing that, I don't know. But at the time, that was really impressive for them to be able to do that.
Wow.
And then while I was there, I did do some lab technician work. I got hired in as an hourly undergrad worker in a couple different labs. One of them was the weed biological control lab. So it was mainly working with a lot of rangeland weeds, cattle pasture, rangeland, middle of the nowhere areas of Wyoming. I've been to a lot of areas in Wyoming that people wouldn't even think about just because we were out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like, you think Wyoming is middle of nowhere to begin with, but let me tell you, there are parts of Wyoming that most people don't even know exist unless they have a reason to go there.
Yeah.
So I've been all over that state.
Why would you have a reason to go there?
Well, obviously they have a weed infestation, and we got to go collect the weevils that are eating the seeds out of the seed heads so we can transport them to another site to get that site started. We did a lot of fun things. I did that for 2 summers, working for that professor. And that was a lot of fun doing that because we got to go out and just see everything. One of the really fun parts was we went to a large organized collection day for the Aphthona beetles, which are the leafy spurge flea beetles. There's been 5 or 6 species released over time in the U.S., and we were up by Devil's Tower in Wyoming. And for those that aren't familiar with Devil's Tower, it's a large old volcanic structure, and it is on the west end of the Black Hills. So the Black Hills extend from South Dakota into that northeast part of Wyoming. And so we were up in that neck of the woods near a town called Sundance, and we were out there for a flea beetle collection day. So all you're doing is you're walking through these pasture lands with a sweep net, and you're sweeping through, and then you bring back your sweep net, holding on tight so nothing gets out, and you dump it into this big multi-layered funnel. And if you're familiar with the old scoops for Kool-Aid, the little plastic scoops that you would measure out, they were using those to measure out because 3,000 beetles were in each scoop.
What?
And they would take it and they would put it into a fountain cup, like a paper fountain cup, and then put the lid on. And so you'd have these, I think they were 20-ounce cups. And so they would put a scoop in there, a few sprigs of leafy spurge, and close it up. And we walked away with 40-something of those cups. So if you do the math on that, that's roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 to 150,000 beetles. That's what we walked away with a delivery list of all the places we needed to deliver on our way back for those beetles. On the day, they estimated they collected over 3 million of those beetles.
No way. That's insane.
So that's roughly 1,000 releases.
Yeah.
At 3,000 a release.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, just a crazy number of little tiny insects. And the hotel we were staying in had one room that was isolated by itself and had its own window air conditioner unit. And because we didn't have a lot of good ice packs to keep them overnight, we wanted to get them frozen So we put those in a little mini fridge, but we cranked the AC down in this one room to keep them cold and set the cooler and open in front of the AC unit. But one of the cups, the lid popped off. And so we had beetles everywhere in the room.
That's super fun. Yeah, awesome.
So that's kind of one of the highlights of my undergrad experience.
Okay, so Wyoming. How about your grad school?
So
What
school.
What was that like?
I did it in two different places.
What were some of those experiences? Okay.
So my master's degree, I skipped across Nebraska. I'm originally from Nebraska. I went to Wyoming because I was from the western part of Nebraska. And then I went to Iowa State for my master's degree. And while I was there, we were working on soybean aphids. So that's that little allusion I made to earlier with the whole soybean aphid thing. So I worked on two main large projects. One was a reduced risk insecticide. So those were defined as insecticides that somehow lessen the impact on the environment or beneficial insects, but still control the pests. So we were looking at some of those in comparison. So we were looking at seed treatments with a couple of products there, a couple of foliar products, and then versus a broad spectrum pyrethroid product that we were all comparing in, and then of course an untreated check. And the interesting thing about this is all of these plots that we were counting were also feeding data into the threshold that was developed for soybean aphid across the north central region. So while I wasn't directly part of that economic threshold project, all the aphids that we were counting for my project were going into that project as well. They had some separate pieces where they were doing a spray every 3 or 4 weeks to keep aphids down. So we had a zero aphid, a control where we didn't do anything, and then varying levels of when we would spray in various products. So I did a lot of small plot work with a backpack sprayer with one of my colleagues, or actually not really a colleague at that point, one of my fellow lab mates that was also a master's, and then he started his PhD before I left. So that was 2 years worth of work right there. And then that second year I was there, I started another piece, which was some non-target work for a parasitic wasp that they were looking at releasing. So what we did were large-scale surveys of the native aphid community in prairies in Iowa. And so that was a lot of fun. If you think aphids are just small and green, oh man, they are red, they are brown, they are black, they have stripes, they have spots. There's a lot of different aphids out there.
Yeah.
And so that was a very different project, but a lot of fun. So my master's took 3 years because I started that project the second year and it needed a second season worth of data for that. So that was my master's degree. It was at Iowa State. And then at that point, I began job hunting. And I knew extension was on my list of things that I was looking into. And so then I applied to UNL in Nebraska Extension. And so at the time they would bring people into Lincoln for an initial interview. And I got 3 of those. I applied to 4 positions all at the same time. I got interviews in Lincoln for 3 of them. So I did 2 the first day and 1 the second day. So I had 2 days worth of this.
Wow.
3 interviews in 2 days. Fortunately, it was in the same place. And by the second one, I didn't have to listen to the HR benefits spiel again, which was nice.
Yeah.
They at least recognized, okay, he's interviewing multiple times for the same position, different place in the state. We don't have to give it to him 3 times. We can do it once and be good.
Yeah.
And then it worked out to where I wasn't going to have enough time on their time frame. So all the hiring committees and administration within Extension to do all 3. They wanted to bring me to all 3 for a local interview. So the local interview here is you go and you actually interview with your local county extension board, and then the local extension staff and faculty are welcome to attend that as well. And so there's a lot of input to when you get hired in to an extension educator here in Nebraska. And so I ended up interviewing for 2 of those. So I came in and I interviewed for 1, and then I had a day off, which they put me up in a hotel for the extra day, which was nice, which then I'll admit it, I wrote about 6 or 8 pages of my thesis while sitting in the hotel room that day.
Nice.
Yes, it was good. It always feels good when you can make those, big chunks done for that.
Yeah.
And then I drove down to the second interview on that, what would be the third day. And I got offered both, and I had to choose. So the one was in kind of south central Nebraska. The other one was up in northeast Nebraska. And at the time, there was only one other field crop entomologist in a county extension office in the state of Nebraska. Well, he would have been right next door if I'd gone into the southeast or south central one.
I see.
And so it's like, well, I kind of get my own gig up in the Northeast then, because I'll be the only entomologist in a county extension office in the region. Like, this sounds good. So that's, in talking it over with my wife, what we came up with was that would probably be the best pick in terms of what we were going to do. So I accepted that one. I started in June of 2008. And so that was my journey through my master's degree program into what is still my current position. Here in the northeast part of Nebraska. So I've been here, it'll be 17 years in a couple months.
Wow. So then they paid you through your PhD, or?
Sort of.
Because this was between your master's and PhD, right?
Yes. So I never gave up the job. I still was working. I had a year that I took off between working on degrees. One of the employee benefits for being a UNL employee is that you get up to 15 credit hours of coursework for $1 a credit hour that you use. You do have to pay some applicable course, fees, university fees. Now, some of the fees are waived because you're an employee. Like, one of the funnest things that got waived when I got started was they needed all of my medical background and information. And I called and asked and was trying to get some details, and I mentioned that I was an employee, and they're like, "Oh, you're an employee? Well, never mind. We don't need any of that."
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, hey, it's one less thing you have to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I started out, it took me 7 years to complete my PhD. I did usually about one course a semester. And UNL Entomology Department has a very well-established online master's degree program. And so I was utilizing a lot of those courses to satisfy my program of study for my PhD. I did have to go down for one semester. Thankfully, I had an aunt and uncle that lived just outside of Lincoln, so I roomed with them for the fall semester, and the entomology department was very gracious. They gave me a desk and a phone so I could continue with my other extension work while I was on campus. Yeah, it worked out really, really nice. So I took take hard classes because they challenge you. And I took multiple regression analysis for statistics majors. I was in the graduate student statistics class.
Yeah.
I learned a ton. Now, it was a challenge. I was working hard at that class, but I learned a lot because I had to work hard at it and stick with it. So I took a couple classes. I got one of my seminar classes out of the way. You have to present and do the seminar stuff. I was able to get another one of those requirements waived with my extension background and having to do some of those things. So I was able to get something double counted, which is always good. Anytime you can double count. Yes, so all of this coursework was my professional development for the 3.5 years I was taking coursework. And then I started my field work after I got my coursework done. And I was looking at, again, I stuck with that prairie theme. And there are a lot of native prairies in my neck of the woods that are cut annually for hay. And so they border a lot of crop fields. So we were it's the old classic push-pull strategy. So the prairies are natural habitat. They're not getting sprayed with insecticides. So that's your pull. They pull in. And then your push is when that gets cut for hay. Like, okay, what moves out into that adjacent crop field? Are we getting benefits from this? Unfortunately, I got no results. I mean, there was nothing significant that we could find moving from those. But even then, if it's not significant, it still tells you information. Like, okay, it's not measurable. There's been other work that's been done by other scientists that show there are landscape level effects of those native and natural habitats in the area. But whether or not you'll directly see that in your row crop when it's adjacent, you're not going to notice because it's more of a landscape level effect as opposed to an adjacent effect. So it fits in there. And so I graduated in 2016 with my PhD.
Awesome.
And so it was great because it doubled as I got a on-farm research project out of it, which is great when you're working with growers and producers in the area to get research done. And so I checked a lot of different boxes getting a degree, but also I worked it, so it came out professionally as well.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like going back, what made you originally interested in insects? Like, were you a kid or like how long have you been into bugs?
So my mother tells the story of when I would be just itty bitty and sitting on the sidewalk and smashing ants.
Yeah.
That's where, that's the earliest I've heard of that interest. I have really good memories of being in that, 6, 7 years old, and we had a small snapping turtle as a pet.
Nice.
So this thing was probably 6 inches from front of the shell to back of the shell. It wasn't very big, but it was one of our favorite things to do in the summer was to go out into the backyard and catch crickets, as many crickets as we could find, and toss them in there and watch that thing chase those crickets around. So that was one avenue. And then the thing that really solidified it all, I participated in 4-H growing up. And one of my main project areas was the entomology project area. And so that's where it really stuck. I did the collections for a really long time. The irony, I don't know if you could call it that, but now I'm one of the leaders in the state for that 4-H entomology project area within my position. And so it's been a lot of fun. When I joined Extension, we were still using the same materials that I was using as a kid. And so the old manual that we were using still had mantids and walking sticks in with the rest of the orthopterans that we think of now. Oh, and cockroaches. Cockroaches were in there. And so Orthopter was the large kind of lump order at the time. Now it's not. So I got to rewrite that manual with a couple of colleagues. And so that was a lot of fun. Like, I did this, I used this as a kid, and now I get to rewrite it, make it, modernize it.
Yeah, lots of outdated information that you got to completely revamp. That's super cool. And that's just for Nebraska, or?
Yeah, it's based on the 4-H entomology project for Nebraska, but it's a digital-only manual. So wherever you're at in the country, you can purchase that for download and take it.
That's cool. That's really
I
cool.
do know there's a couple other states that have used it as a model for their manuals.
That's awesome. Yeah. How about let's move on to big plans for the future. Like, where do you see yourself going and doing? Is there any like cool things you want to do moving forward, or trips maybe, or anything that you're excited to explore in the future?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'm really diving into now is the 3D printing, and I'm using that as an avenue to produce educational tools to help with workshops and all of that. So I've started small. I designed a pinning block that lines up with our 4-H manuals. That's actually really easy. That's, a couple of cubes lumped together, so it wasn't really hard. And that was my first foray in, and then what I've done since is I've designed a soybean defoliation exercise for use with producers, where they have to go through the actual steps of scouting for defoliation in soybeans. And I can reach them here. I've got some of so this is my first piece, where I was trying to get soybean. This isn't the full trifoliate, it's just a leaflet. And it's really tough to gauge, how thick do I need to make this? So this would be a great example of failing forward. This is too big.
Yeah.
This is too big. This is some Japanese beetle damage. So notice how much thinner this one is compared to 3 millimeters as opposed to 7. Makes a big difference. I forget what that was, but quite a big difference. And then, your fun snafus with a 3D printer where it freaks out on you and doesn't look right. Mm-hmm. But that's been something that I've been working on. I did get to implement it last year in some extension programs, and I had a pre and post test that went with it. And we went from a 45 or 50 point spread on the guesses in terms of how much was missing from these leaves. The post was down to 15% spread.
Wow.
And yeah, so you could really see the difference in them learning, okay, this is what I thought it was to begin with.
Yeah.
Or what I was saying was 50% defoliation was really only 20.
That's cool.
And so just using that, and there's some other people across the country that are starting to do some of this too. I know Ohio State's got some people that are really getting into the 3D printing. Mine is based more on actually pulling the leaflets off the stem. So I did my little stems so they can actually go through the process, because you're supposed to pull the one with the most damage off, the one with the least damage off, and then you guess based on what's left. And so mine is more walking through the process. What I've seen of the other one for soybean defoliation is they've got a couple of templates ready for you and they match it up. You have to match it. This is actually walking them through the process.
Yeah, that's so
and
cool.
So
I mean, to me, it's just like, like a hands-on like simulation. Like if you think about in med school with a CPR dummy or something like that.
There you go. That's a great example. It's the same basic concept. You're practicing on a realistic example.
Yeah.
Not the actual plant or person in the case of the medical example that you gave. And so that's one thing. And then in terms of future plans, I'm going to go down this 3D printing road again. I've lined up with one of our corn entomologists that does a lot of corn rootworm work. And what we want to do is actually take somewhere between 20 and 30 photographs of roots that have been dug, washed, and rated for root injury from corn rootworms. There is some stitching software out there that will allow you, if you take put this on a turntable and slowly turn it around and take a picture each time you stop. So if you take 20 or 30 of those pictures, it'll auto stitch it all together into a 3D rendering. And then the plan is to actually print with the 3D printer these corn roots that have been rated for training purposes. So then you've got something that you can, because when you dig those roots, they eventually lose their color, they shrivel when they dry out, they don't look like they should. And so it's really tough to train on these dried, shriveled roots. And pictures, they work to some degree, but they're flat, they're two-dimensional. You don't get a good sense of the whole thing. And so the idea is we're going to make some actual models based on the real thing.
And I think something that's cool about this is that it's accessible to so many people, because if you're an extension agent, typically you're likely affiliated with a university. And most universities now have 3D printers available. So that's really cool. They could go to the library and get this printed out to use in the real field, which is very cool to think about.
Yeah, that's the idea. I'm approaching it from the teaching tool side. Is where I'm headed with this.
Very cool. Yeah, well, Wayne, we're about running out of time here, but I just thank you so much for chatting with me. This was super cool, super interesting to hear about all of your interesting extension stories and projects, and very nice to catch up with you. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me. I hope everybody enjoyed listening, but thanks so much again, Wayne, for chatting with me. This was super cool. For all of you listening, I will leave some information about Wayne down in the description so you can learn more about all the work that he does. But thanks again, Wayne. This was super awesome.
Absolutely, Bradon. This was a lot of fun. And by the way, it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to extension stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you all for listening.